Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 6th, 2016. We got to try a little experiment here this morning. It looks like everything was set just a wee bit wrong, as we did a little bit of traveling around town last night with the laptop, and I see it is not yet switched back over to my much more reliable Ethernet connection, but the levels look good. I don't know whether we should just continue on with this connection or Justice, let me ask you this one on here. If I turn off the Wi-Fi and switch over to my Ethernet, which is already plugged in, that will that not drop the signal? It probably does risk it too. All right, well, we'll just go on. He says everything's fine as is, so thank God for a strong Wi-Fi connection. Let's hope that lasts. We've done the show via Wi-Fi before, and the Wi-Fi at home isn't awful, so we'll stick with it and hope everything rolls as planned, although it looks like all the websites and apps that I depend on will be a little bit slower, so bear with me today, and you'll have to bear with me for even more than usual today, since we will not be able to have Greg join us today. In fact, I got a note yesterday that there are even more meetings planned for him for work for the rest of the week. We'll have him back tomorrow, Wednesday, but it looks like we lose him again Thursday, Friday, too. So hopefully maybe he'll get a chance to send us some articles to share so that at least we'll have him here in spirit. We always have, of course, Bill in Portland, Maine, tweeting us our morning tweets. Daily Kos Radio with Kagro X, who is me, David Waldman, is live now, but only because Bob Dole made a phone call to make it happen. That's the news of the morning in terms of, I guess that's real news, right? Hasn't been proven fake yet, so we'll roll with it. As it turns out, the claim is, with regard to Bob Dole, that he is alive and still apparently working and influential in Washington, D.C., which is unexpected, but of course that wasn't the real news. The real news part of this is that it came up last night that Bob Dole, well, you know what? It was like round 2 of these stories. They were still trying to figure out how exactly the phone call between Donald Trump and the government of Taiwan came about. And at the start of this story, I think we were all given to understand, or maybe we just wanted to think about it this way, that there had been some kind of horrible mistake. We've made a terrible, terrible mistake. But then it began to sound more like it was planned. Now, by the middle of the evening, well, actually by morning yesterday, the Trump team was claiming that they had this phone call in the works, this idea of shifting Taiwan policy and doing it post-election. They were claiming that this has been in the works for months. Now, we know that the Donald Trump team doesn't plan anything months in advance, and they probably had no inkling that they were going to ever have to call the government of Taiwan at all because they didn't think they were going to win. So I don't know. That one doesn't really ring true to me. But anyway, then there was by evening some question about who called who. Did the Taiwanese government just say, I think this is the version of it we all, I think, initially believed was, well, the Taiwanese government said, what the hell? Let's call Donald Trump and see if we can get through. Everybody else is doing it, and he may have no idea that he's not supposed to talk to us. But then there was more speculation, and I guess maybe this story of the idea of it being planned and an actual policy took root, and it became, no, the Trump side initiated the call. This was a conscious decision, in other words, to reach out to the Taiwanese government. Of course, in the background of all this is, Donald Trump and the Trump Organization want to build properties or partner in building properties in Taiwan. And so it will pay for them, presumably, to have a better business relationship with the government there. Now, it takes another crazy twist. Bob Dole, who again is alive, says that he helped arrange the call, which is surprising on so many levels. The Hill has their take on the story, written by Jesse Hellman. The Hill, by the way, does a fantastic job of promoting itself on Twitter. I don't like The Hill as a publication, generally speaking. I mean, I'm not favorably inclined toward it, and that's not the same thing as I hate The Hill or I won't read The Hill. But I read it more often than I want to because they do an excellent job, too good, I would say, of promoting their stories online. And frankly, I should be retweeting Daily Kos stories this much and this often and commenting on them. But I don't know. Daily Kos is not nearly as aggressive. And I mean, when I say aggressive in promoting their stories, The Hill does too much. It's annoying. But then I need stories. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a lesson to be learned from that. Doing things the nice way and not being aggressive and pushy doesn't pay. By the way, donate to me. There. How did that work? By the way, I before I even tell you about Bob Dole, I will say about 3 or 4 folks I was able to tell in email have taken to heart the plea to switch from monthly support via PayPal to monthly support via Patreon. And so I appreciate that. And likewise, whenever you do one of these pitches, 3 or 4 people say, oh, I would like to contribute also. And also, by the way, a couple of people who were already contributing said, oh, well, I'll contribute more. I kind of feel bad about that. It's good. We have money. That's nice. It's good that we're entertaining you enough for you to say, I can and should do more. But I feel like other people should do it instead. Look, what can you do? You can't force anybody, right? But I have another article that will make you cry about all this stuff and maybe donate, and that's more important. We'll get back to bothering you for money later. Now, Bob Dole bothering Donald Trump, maybe for money. I don't know. Bob Dole, he's getting up there in years, by the way. His face is changing. You know, it's one of those, well, you know, that's the way the aging game goes. Anyway, more to the substantive point. The report, Bob Dole organized Trump's Taiwan call. That is amazing. Why? Donald Trump's call with Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen was organized by Bob Dole, a former Republican senator. They helpfully inform us here in the Hill, because it's been long enough that people may have forgotten, or people have come of political age, and Bob Dole is not a part of their collective memory. He was also a one-time presidential nominee, in case you were wondering. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, being reported here in the Hill. Anyway, Dole told the Journal that the law firm he is affiliated with, wink wink, does work with the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the U.S. It's fair to say that we may have had some influence, he said. Trump's Friday conversation broke decades of U.S. protocol. For several decades, the U.S. has followed the One China policy that doesn't acknowledge Taiwan as a nation, but instead goes along with China's view that Taiwan is a province that broke away, which I guess kind of is, but broke all the way away and doesn't. All right, well, I don't want to upset people in Taiwan. And there are people in Taiwan listening. Jimmy Carter formally declared Beijing the sole government of China in 1979, which ended formal U.S. diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Not much information about what Bob Dole was thinking about or how he might have had any influence or what. But, okay, I think he's kind of winking at it, and it sounds like they may have had some influence, and he's underplaying the amount they may have had. Taiwan policy, interesting, weird thing about diplomatic relations. It doesn't make any sense from anybody's standpoint. It's just one of those things that everybody agrees. If we all say something that doesn't quite make sense, we will agree not to bomb one another. And everybody sort of says, meh, okay, that's a fair trade. I would like to not be bombed. You would like to not be bombed. And why don't we all agree to this? Except, of course, the Taiwanese probably don't, generally speaking, agree to the. Although I think they're pleased not to be bombed or invaded. And if you are a long-time listener to the show, you probably know that we have had a couple of communiques, if you will, from listeners, Americans? Are you American? Expatriates, I guess, living in Taiwan, and sort of some things came in at random at first, and I read them because, interesting. And I suspect that not being versed in the diplomatic relations, and also my not being responsible to anyone as President-elect of the United States, I just went ahead and read it as interesting. Ooh, what if it was lobbying influence, and the guy who sent it to me is lobbying on behalf of the government and looking to improve there's nothing really wrong with improving the image of Taiwan here in the United States. It's only when it rises to the diplomatic level that it's problematic. But yeah, so far, also yesterday, I should grab this thing. I just let it fly by because I wasn't too interested in the story, but it now occurs to me that it'd be interesting to see if you could figure out who it was. But people in the Trump camp basically now dismissing the Taiwan phone call issue as, if you don't like it, you can go screw yourself. Which is also not particularly diplomatic. But I bring up our Taiwan correspondent because I have another dispatch from him. And let me see, I'll grab it, and then I think that'll help us credit everyone properly. Here, I set aside the tweet. It's Dwight Yearling, or do you say Jurling? Jurling, who tweets as heading uphill. He's a bicyclist, not a, chains and leather motorbiker. Although he may be that too, but it doesn't look like it. And he has sent us a couple of articles on issues in Taiwan, and it's been really interesting to see some of it, and including one I don't think we ever got around to sharing, which was about Taiwan's dealing with issues as to the rights of gay, lesbian, and transgender communities in their territory, which is like, oh yeah, they'll have to deal with that too. Why not do some comparative government study about that? And the answer is because Donald Trump said something, and I have to talk about that. But he did send us this piece with a link to a blog post, I guess someone from the expatriate community, which I think you get the flavor for it in the headline all by itself. And I'll bring it up and share it with you, because why not? The View from Taiwan is the name of the blog. And the post title is Tsai Calls Trump, World Commentariat IQ Drops 50 Points. The idea here being that in Taiwan, they say, yeah, like Trump's advisors, big deal. He talked to Taiwan. But of course, they're Taiwan, so that won't strike them as odd in the same way. I will say this, with zero training in international diplomacy and zero training in the deep historical background in this weird three-way relationship, I will say I'm not constitutionally opposed, small c, constitutionally opposed to the idea of saying, maybe we don't really, in every instance, without ever testing, want to just let China set our Taiwan policy. I see why we have to be cautious and why we have to be ready to be deferential in certain circumstances to the Chinese government. Bombing being the chief reason among them. Trade, of course, another. But, it's not out of the question, I would say, just generally speaking, without the specific knowledge, that maybe you test once in a while can, probe just a little bit, and how much room is there to do things a little bit differently. I don't believe that kind of organized thought is going on in the Trump camp, but as a backfill explanation, it might be worth something. Anyway, so yeah, the guy basically, our writer here is Michael Turton, if I am reading it correctly, and you'll find him at Michael Turton, TURTON.blogspot.com, and that's where the View from Taiwan blog is, and it's basically, let me skip around a little bit, saying he's having a nice day, riding his bikes around too. I guess he's a biker friend of Michael's. And gets around to saying, so you can imagine my totally mellow state of mind when I returned home in the afternoon to find that the international media had melted down and commentators were in an uproar because President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan had been on the phone with President-elect Trump of the United States. My inbox filled with messages. Twitter is like a house on fire, and Facebook is the kingdom of attempted snark. I immediately got myself a large cup of coffee to get properly caffeinated so I could cope with this S-storm. They say that in Taiwan, and spent some quality time with my golden retriever so I could interact with a loving, sapient being before taking on the media. Boy, they not happy with the American pundits' reaction to this. Although, I would say, to put your minds at ease a little bit, it's chiefly a reaction to Donald Trump, not Taiwan. The fact that there's some non-Trump ground to stand on and say, Trump doesn't know what he's doing, is probably what's really motivating all of the sudden interest in the one China policy among people who are not China experts. So, all right. He goes on to say, all I can say is I wish Trump would call Tsai every day so we could witness again and again how irredeemably stupid the international media is. And I don't think you have probably a lot of listeners here that might join in on that. And not necessarily to have the two of them talk, but showing how stupid some people in the media are. Well, okay. He says, as my net friend Eric Pickett noted, it's amazing to see how well trained the international media is to carry Beijing's water. China doesn't even need to release as much as a press statement, and the media is mindlessly anticipating Beijing's talking points. That's not terribly difficult to do, I don't think. But again, I would say, for the comfort of our friends in Taiwan, this is chiefly about finding something to criticize Donald Trump about. Or something else to add to the outrage fire. Yep, he continues, The Guardian says that Trump angers Beijing with provocative phone call. Note that nothing that China ever does angers anyone. Once again, the framing is that the U.S. and Taiwan are being provocative, but poor put upon China. We're used to that on this blog. He says, as my man Michael Thim, one of the most quietly funny people I know, observed on Twitter, somewhere in, Chinese name here, Zhongnanhai, somewhere in Zhongnanhai, people are LMAO, out of excitement that they managed to convince everyone that a phone call is a radical escalation. I and others have written on the way, the international media serves Beijing by claiming actions are provocative and sure to anger Beijing. That's true. I think I'll agree with that. I sure wish the media would simply report what happened without giving us breathless analysis of, oh my God, ZOMG. Oh my God, the end is nigh. Apparently, Rachel Maddow, who is a good progressive, really ought to be celebrating this phone call to the head of democracy with no guns and a world-leading national health insurance program, said on national TV, this is how wars start. On Twitter, otherwise intelligent people who are sometimes treated as experts are actually speculating about how Beijing might blockade Taiwan. My friend Sean Su sighed on Facebook. It's interesting that Obama seeks peace with Cuba and everyone goes, awesome. But Trump takes a call of congratulations from a democratic nation that provides thousands of U.S. jobs, and the U.S. media goes nuts. Julia Famularo laughed from her perch in Honolulu, lucky lady, So when China, Z, and Taiwan, Ma, meet, it's a historic breakthrough. But when the president-elect of the United States makes a cordial call to Taiwan, it's a crisis. Also weighing in, Lita Hong Fincher, author of Leftover Women and always a good source of insightful snark, according to our writer here, snarked, all this trouble is because Tsai never married or had children, of course. Well, I guess that's something that you would understand a little better if we lived in Taiwan, but okay, I think I can grasp that picture. That, of course, it says, referring to the time the state media attacked Tsai. Amidst all these warnings of the impending apocalypse, what did China actually say? Well, Beijing at first said it was another trick of Tsai's and reiterated its boilerplate stance. In words, it said nothing at all important. As I was writing this, it had made a solemn representation to the U.S., also boilerplate, whenever something happens that might raise Taiwan's status. This is common. I noted in August how the media notes that X will anger China, but when nothing happens, the media never reports nothing happened. Thus, readers in the U.S., clueless about Taiwan relations, assume things have gone to hell when in fact they are as okay as they ever are. Indeed, the media slant is not to ask, what does this mean for our relations with a fellow democracy? But, oh my God, what is this going to do to our relations with Beijing? Well, we worry about our relations with Beijing because bombs and trade. But okay, I definitely have a point here. One way to read the media brouhaha is to observe how incompetent the media is and how it does Beijing's work for it in referring to tensions that don't exist. For all of us who watch Taiwan, that is standard. Sigh. For example, many of us had a good laugh about this from Jia Lin Yang, who is Washington Post's Deputy National Security Editor. Jia Lin Yang writing, just got back from a week in Taiwan. Tensions with China are really high, so this is just extraordinary. Over in Taiwan, they're asking, didn't you notice those high tensions? I was dodging falling bombs all day on the bicycle. Really sucked. Good point, I guess. There is a little bit more here we'll share. There's another way to think about it. He says the media are also signaling China about how it could or should react. If China doesn't react strongly, the media won't be validated. Then they will say nothing about their failure, of course. Consider Evan Madeiros' words in The Atlantic. The Chinese leadership will see this as a highly provocative action of historic proportions. This is a quote from Evan Madeiros, former Asia director at the White House National Security Council, in his interview with FT, Financial Times, I guess. Regardless if it was deliberate or accidental, this phone call will fundamentally change China's perception of Trump's strategic intentions for the negative. With this kind of move, Trump is setting a foundation of enduring mistrust and strategic competition for U.S.-China relations. Madeiros was Obama's Asia czar and would have had a high position in the Clinton administration. He rotated out of the Obama administration to the Eurasia Group, which does business in China, and there he is in FT and The Atlantic, quoted as if he never worked for a firm which does business with China. Just like Henry Kissinger, you've made it when the media never mentions your business interests. Think he's signaling China about how it should react? Your guess is as good as mine, but a strong reaction would benefit Madeiros' friends and hurt Trump. No conflict of interest there. In other words, congratulations, media, you just gave China permission to go to its limit. Indeed, the Chinese initially said, according to the Washington Post, asked about Trump's call during a conference on international affairs in Beijing early Saturday. China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, called it a small action that cannot change China's standing in international society. The breach of protocol will, quote, not change the one China policy that the U.S. government has supported for many years, he said. The one China principle is the foundation for healthy development of Sino-U.S. relations. We don't wish for anything to obstruct or ruin this foundation. It was only later, after the media S-storm, that they apparently realized that they had support from U.S. media and anti-Trump folks, and they really could run with this. Now they are doing full-on diplomatic press with the ambassador summoned, etc. Remember, they actually summoned the U.S. ambassador last year over something that is described with acronyms and it rings no bells to me because I'm an ignorant American. Last year it was over the SCS FONOPS, F-O-N-O-P-S. And in 2014, and there's a link. I'm just not clicking on it. Suffice to say, it's something I don't remember and wasn't tuned into then or now. He was also the ambassador summoned in 2014 over cybercrime accusations and in 2010 over Obama's meeting with the Dalai Lama. Summoning the ambassador is normal, almost an annual ritual whenever China's dreams of expansion are challenged and is essentially meaningless. But it will probably make a great noise in the media. China chooses actions that play the Western media for publicity but have little concrete effect. They've learned well from the international media, and now we will see whether the Trump administration's China policy will be shaped by China being angry the way Obama's administration was. And parenthetically, he writes, ruh-roh, better not do X because it will make China angry. Right now, it looks as if Trump is going to be more focused on the Middle East, but China's response should change that, which is probably why it won't amount to much. And a couple of additions here at the end. The widespread media bias against Trump was evident in the reporting and comments. Everyone assumed Trump had wildly and randomly made this call. Actually, it was negotiated and agreed on and discussed among his advisors and the Taiwan side for some time beforehand, which is really rather amazing. But so many observers assumed it was a spur-of-the-moment, unconsidered thing. And that's because we all here regard... I'm speaking now to my friends in Taiwan. This is how we regard our president-elect. That he acts impulsively and doesn't give much in the way of consideration to what it is he's doing. But good point made here. And I think a good opportunity for us to make the point, too, acknowledging that point and saying, yeah, this is more about how our media thinks of our president-elect than having anything at all, really, to do with China. So, okay. On the grand scheme of things, perhaps it's not the worst thing ever. Maybe we could say that. All right. Let's see. There are 100,000 different directions we might go from here. Let's see. Let's save that one for Wednesday. Here's big news. A follow-up from some of the stories we reported yesterday. Remember, we spent a lot of time talking about how crazy these two particular Republican governors were. Paul LePage, who's still crazy and still governor, and Pat McCrory, who's still crazy but won't be governor. And here's the latest development on that one. And once again, I ended up putting away the story from The Hill because they tweeted it 85,000 times with a picture attached and made it too shiny an object for me to ignore. And I said, okay, McCrory, I talked about him. I need a story about this. McCrory concedes North Carolina governor's race. That's the story. The backstory is I took The Hill's piece on it and not Daily Kos's because Daily Kos didn't tweet it 12 times with a eye-catching picture because we don't want to swamp your Twitter feed with garbage. We assume we tweet it to you once and you say, oh, great, I'll go read that. But really the truth is you probably have to tweet it like 24 times the way The Hill does. I'm learning a little bit about internet marketing, that's all. Anyway, Rebecca Savransky gets the credit here instead of Daily Kos. But, of course, this is, well, I don't know. Maybe this isn't original reporting. The last piece I read from The Hill wasn't. So let's see. Anyway, McCrory concedes. That's the good news. North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory, the Republican, is conceding the governor's race to Democratic rival Roy Cooper nearly a month after the election. We were concerned that he might try to force the legislature to install him instead. And he's not going to. In a video posted Monday, McCrory said, serving as the governor of North Carolina has been a privilege and an honor. Oh, you know what? I should do the Bob Dole thing. We may have had something to do with that. Wink, wink. Who knows? I think McCrory was ready to take it to the legislature, but we showed him just how crazy that is. And all 3,000 of us were so peeved at him that he decided to concede the race instead. So congratulations, everyone. I knew he could do it. Anyway, so he concedes, and is there a little bit more down here? Because there's still the news of the special legislative session going on. And it is noted here in this article, during his remaining weeks in the role, McCrory said he and his team will focus on developing a financial plan to be approved by a special legislative session to help our citizens and communities impacted by Hurricane Matthew and by the current wildfires in the western region of our state. No mention here of the court packing plan, but I guess that remains out there and speculative. Don't know what the real chances of their doing that might be, but I guess it's still out there. Speaking of court packing plans, so there was a little bit of Twitter action last night for the proposal that Merrick Garland be confirmed on January 3rd by the temporary majority that will exist in between the termination of the terms of Class 3 senators on January 3rd at noon and the swearing in of the new Class 3. And lots of people sharing it, getting excited about it. A lot of people who are red teaming the proposal, as I like to call it, and just trying to poke holes in it and see, well, what if they do this and what if they do that? And there certainly are a number of parliamentary tricks and objections that you, as you might expect for something so extraordinary, that they could make somewhere along the line. But bottom line is, it all still comes down to, well, if you're holding the gavel and a majority, there's a whole lot you can dispense with, even if the objections make sense or even if they are legitimate. Remember also that objections to things like, well, to any of this stuff, aren't what they call self-executing. That is, just because something breaks the rules doesn't mean it stops automatically once someone points to the rule. I mean, I guess we get sort of too used to that, and we too much enjoy the luxury of the rule of law in this country, and we forget what it actually means to execute the law. So, for instance, it was objected, among other things, it was objected that for instance, that the consideration of a nomination as the first order of business in this temporary majority might otherwise be disallowed under the existing Senate rules. Of course, there's the question of, do the existing Senate rules actually control here? And that, as we explained the other day, harkens back to at least part of the advisory opinion offered by Vice Presidents Nixon and then later Rockefeller as well, which seemed to suggest that the Senate could be understood to be operating under general parliamentary law at the outset of a new session, a new Congress. And there are all sorts of implications to that, and that's not the entirety of the opinion. And it is worth noting that it is an opinion as opposed to a ruling from the chair, but the subtle differences for these purposes don't make a great deal of difference. But there are other objections, including that taking up a nomination as the first piece of business violates the usual order of business. There are objections that the offering up of credentials by new senators elect ought to be considered to be a highly privileged motion, although I think it's a misreading of the Senate rules to say that it takes precedence over all other business. The rules merely say that such a motion to present credentials is always in order, but that's not the same thing as saying you can interrupt a speaking senator or the current flow of business to introduce it. It merely means if there's a break in the action and someone can stand and be recognized, If they say, I've got the credentials of some new senators, you can't say, well, that's out of order for right now. I mean, you can say it, but the rules say that you shouldn't. And I guess this is where we take the detour to explain what do we mean by rules not being self-executing. All right, there's an existing rule that says it shall always be in order to bring the credentials of a newly elected senator to the chair and have them noticed and have the person sworn in. Fine. And let's say you don't do that right away. Or the rules say, except by unanimous consent, taking up nominations, which would ordinarily be done in executive session in a Senate operating under its usual rules, isn't something that you can do in the first hour of business in a typical Senate day. So you don't have unanimous consent for that, so you can't do it. Okay, that's a valid objection. Here's how it has to be made. Someone has to stand up and say, point of order, and then be recognized by the chair to make the point of order, to state the point of order. Then you would say, Senate rules prohibit our consideration of a nomination like this at this point in time, except in cases of unanimous consent. And should unanimous consent be sought, I might as well tell the chair, I do intend to object. The chair would then have the opportunity to say, okay, the point of order is well taken, and the chair might offer to rule on the point of order. Now, somebody might also ask from the other side, or the same side, to be heard on the point of order and to make argument, and they might well do that, or the chair could go right to it. And suppose, though, the chair says, you're right, our regular rules say we're not supposed to be doing this, so we really shouldn't. There's still the opportunity for the majority at that point to appeal the ruling of the chair. It's rude. It's not usually what happens. And if you've got some kind of cooperation going on, you usually can avoid something like this. But if the chair were to rule that the consideration of the nomination at that point in time, that time of day, according to the Senate rules, which we would assume the chair would think were in operation if it was to make such a ruling, you can simply use a majority to overrule the ruling of the chair and you're right back in business. In other words, a point of order has to be made, you have to be recognized to make the point of order pointing out that the rules are being violated. You gotta make that point. You gotta have your ruling or your objection either sustained by the chair or validated by a majority vote of the body. And if you can't get all of those things, then you're just, duly noted, this breaks the rules. But guess what? We just looked at it and the body decided for itself, as is their right, that it's not a violation of the rules. Or they could decide that rule doesn't exist anymore. Or they could decide that rule isn't in effect right now, thanks to the advisory opinion of 1957 from Vice President Richard Nixon, even though there is a second part of the ruling that would suggest that taking up regular business, and a nomination might in fact be considered regular business, although then I would argue, well, it's actually executive business, not Senate legislative business, though it is uniquely the prerogative of the Senate to offer advice and consent, so it could very well be considered regular business. But I simply don't care. And 34 to 36 of us vote, shut up. And since there's only 66 of us here in the building, that's all it takes. And the confirmation's done. The end. There's definitely some brute force involved in this. Don't kid yourself about that. But, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But I mean, it's going to be done to you one way or another, in the pretty near future. I'm pretty sure of that. And if it isn't, or it never was going to be, well, okay, so we got away with one on that. Big deal. Anyway, there will be more questions about that. Oh, and if you are thinking of calling your senators to pitch this idea to them, go right ahead and do it. Whether or not they're Republicans or Democrats or independents, I would say go ahead and do it. No secret. Doesn't have to be hidden from Republicans. Might as well get them used to the idea. Frankly, here's what I learned from the nuclear option fights. Nobody's going to care. To the extent that anybody knows among the general population of the United States who Merrick Garland is, 90% of them probably already think he's on the Supreme Court. They have no idea that he's been pending for this long and he's been blocked. A lot, savvy people do. We talk to those people. The rest of the world has no idea. And if the name Merrick Garland rings a bell at all, it probably it reads as, oh yeah, that's the guy that Obama put on the Supreme Court and Republicans didn't want him. They probably think he's already there. But likewise, with the nuclear option fight, Republicans swore it was going to change the Senate into the House, and then it didn't. But it holds the potential for it. And if we do this, we're more House-like. True. But nobody cared. And they said, oh my God, it's the end of the Senate and we're going to hold you accountable in the elections and da-da-da-da. And yeah, they won and held the majority. But I promise you, no critical votes were cast in the Senate elections over. You remember that thing in 2013? I'm so mad about that. There were these lower court judges that the president usually has the right to nominate and the Senate usually confirms without much of an issue at all, and then they got confirmed. I'm so angry about that. I'm totally, otherwise a social liberal, but I'm a stickler for the rules, and I'm voting for a Republican to show, doesn't happen. Won't happen here either. This is totally more nuclear, if you're George Bush, if you're trying to catch up with what's going on here. Hi, George. But truthfully, nobody cares about that at all. Or nobody cared about the nuclear option, and I doubt very much whether they would care very much about this one, particularly if it was used to confirm Garland, who, like I said, they mostly think already is on the Supreme Court, or at least ought to be. No one's going to be surprised by the fact that he ends up on the Supreme Court. So I offer that as a partial excuse for all this. And so if you're thinking of calling your senators about it, go ahead and do it. If they're a Republican, go ahead and tell them that America really wants that seat filled by Barack Obama. The vacancy came up in February of last year. The seat belongs, the nomination belongs to him, and why upset the apple cart? Go ahead. You should just give in, basically. That's what America expects of you at this point. And, of course, the idea that you can block a president throughout their presidency, all 4 years if necessary, as you threatened with Hillary Clinton, is ludicrous, and you haven't got a leg to stand on. And so go ahead, call your Republican senators and tell them that too. That you support the idea of smacking them on the nose with a rolled-up newspaper on June 3rd to teach them not to do this crap anymore. I don't know. There's no reason not to tell them that. Secondly, if your senators are Democrats, but they are among the several who will be awaiting swearing in at the time, and so therefore won't have a vote in it, call them anyway. They will be in the Democratic caucus meetings with their colleagues discussing the ins and outs and ups and downs and pros and cons of doing something like this. They need to be able to encourage their colleagues to go ahead and do that and to kind of give, A, those should give them permission. Yeah, I don't mind if you hold up my swearing in if you get this done. And B, yes, I think it's worth the political risk. And by the way, the people who have to do it, who will be seated, are people who are going to have to, in some cases, in 2018, face election, and they'll be a little bit scared. Well, what if I have to run on this nuclear treatment of the Senate in just 2 years? And the answer is no one cares. No one will remember. No one remembered the nuclear option the first time, the second time, the third time. It happens all the time. This one's a little bit new, but no one will be able to figure out what the difference is. And if the upshot is Garland ends up on the Supreme Court, no one's going to even realize there was anything to get upset about. And, if you lose in 2018, it's on you, really, not this. Anyway, so I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. And by the way, also, do you want to make a phone calls to Biden's office? Yes, he absolutely needs to be prepared to do his part in all this. You'll also need, though, to call the president's office or communicate some way to the president. because he has to play a role in this too. And that might be, frankly, I mean, this is not the kind of play Obama likes to involve himself in or appreciates. It's the longest shot probably convincing him of all this, and he'll have to renominate Garland in order for this to work. He'll have to nominate somebody anyway in order for this to work at the end of the previous Congress, the 114th Congress, which very often they simply only adjourn at 11:59 and then reconvene at 12:01 for the new Congress. But at the end, at the adjournment sine die of the 114th Congress, the pending nominations are returned to the president, and if he wants any of those people considered by the 115th Congress, he needs to renominate them. So a little bit of a tight schedule on that, and he may have to finagle a way to make sure that the nomination is made post adjournment sine die, which might happen at 11:59, and yet makes it to the Senate in time to be brought up by the Democratic floor leader at 12:01 or whenever the Senate is gavelled to order by Vice President Biden. So we might need to wait a few minutes for the nomination to be faxed over. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that one in there I was going to say to clear things up, but clearly that probably didn't. That's probably not what happened when I spent that time discussing it with you. Anyway, all right. So let's see. Man, there's like a million other things that need discussing. Let's just sort of do it at random. One, I want to make a hat tip of sorts to some folks who had some really interesting work, who did some really interesting work on the problem of, and again, we still don't have a term that clearly describes these people and sets them apart for their online presence, but what had become known as the alt-right, but which is properly described, as many have pointed out, as a gang of online vaping neo-Nazis and racists and white supremacists, in case there's any difference between the two or three. Anyway, we know that it's uniquely a problem online, and I just thought this was a fun and interesting little side project. Yair Rosenberg writes this one over at Tablet magazine, and let me give you the title. We built a Twitter bot, that trolls Twitter's worst anti-Semitic trolls. I caught this story when I saw retweeted his tweet saying, basically, doing the LOL thing. The online anti-Semitic alt-right trolls are actually saying that our pointing out who they are constitutes harassment, and they're crying about it, which is really rather ironic, given that, of course, the mission of those alt-right weirdos online is to harass others. So what exactly are we talking about? Well, why don't we let the article tell us? As the number 2 most harassed Jewish journalist on Twitter, per the Anti-Defamation League, and remember we're talking about Yair Rosenberg here, I've become intimately familiar with the colorful cast of anti-Jewish bigots that populate social media. There are those who will Photoshop you into gas chambers and concentration camps. Others like pairing Nazi quotes with Taylor Swift pictures. Yeah, that's a subgenre there too. Some just stick to spreading slurs and conspiracy theories. On a whole, they are a rather sad and pathetic bunch, and mostly I just ignore or mock them. But there is one particular type of anti-Semitic troll that I find particularly pernicious, and this is really something. The racists who use their accounts to impersonate Jews and defame them. Here's what's going on. The con goes like this. The troll finds a picture of a very Jewish-looking person online, typically a Hasidic Jew in full regalia, and makes it his avatar. He puts a bunch of very Jewish descriptors in his bio, like Orthodox, Zionist, enemy of the alt-right, whatever. He then proceeds to insert himself into conversations with prominent Twitter users. Conversations that will often be read by thousands, tens of thousands of followers, and say horrifically racist things with those accounts. Thus, it appears to unsuspecting readers that Jews are outlandishly bigoted. Now, of course, it's entirely possible for you to run across outlandishly bigoted Jews, but that this scam is going on, and it's rarely, I don't know. Maybe they are also targeting discussions about Palestinian rights as well. I don't really know. I'm sure there are some who suspect that that's the case, but this is out in more general political discussions that they're doing this. So, as we say, thus it appears to unsuspecting readers that Jews are outlandishly bigoted. The same has been done with other minorities, from Latinos to African Americans to Muslims. And a few examples of them are screen capped and shared here, and then embedded in a tweet by Yair Rosenberg himself, which is itself embedded in this tablet magazine piece. The tweet reads, "Sickest form of anti-Semitism on Twitter, neo-Nazis who impersonate Jews to say racist things to try and defame Jews." Anyway, now the article continues. It's pretty easy to identify these trolls if one knows how to look. Their tweets are indistinguishable from alt-right racism. They regularly retweet the alt-right and other anti-Semites, and if one reverse image searches the account's avatar, one can often find from where it was stolen. He says find where it was stolen from. But because he said one can do that, one can search it, then one can find out, I thought I'd formalize the end of the sentence for him. One can find out from where it was stolen. Sample piece here, a screenshot of a Twitter avatar and bio, a Hasidic man, as described in full regalia, with the Twitter bio that reads, Orthodox, Zionist, enemy of Trump, populism, the alt-right, racism, and anti-Semitism. That is the enemy of all those things. Pro-refugee rights in USA and Europe. Blocked by Prison Planet and Cernovich. And claiming to be located in Sderot, Israel, and going by the name of Yehuda Finkelstein. Bling, so Jewish sounding, right? Take a look at the avatar, take it to a reverse image searching place on the internet, and you will find out that is a photo of Shlomo Goldman, which Wikipedia entry here in Embedded tells us is also known as the Gilles Sanzer Rebbe, the Sanz Klausenberger Grand Rabbi of Union City, New Jersey, not Sderot, Israel, but Union City, New Jersey, where he resides and is rabbi of the Sanz Klausenberger community there. Rabbi Shlomo is the son of the previous Zviller Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai Goldman, and son-in-law of the late Sanz Klausenberger Rebbe, Rabbi Yekusiel Yehuda Halberstam. So, picture, same guy. This time he's Yehuda Finkelstein. So crazy. The problem is, of course, most casual social media users aren't even aware that this sort of racist deception is being perpetrated, let alone trained to be vigilant for it. And Twitter isn't really capable of the detective work to identify these accounts and take them down as they spring up. So, the question becomes, how can users fight back? Can this insidious tool of anti-Semitic harassment be defanged like the triple parentheses echoes that you saw everyone adopt in order to defang, right? Those, of course, were previously used by internet bigots to identify people that they believed were Jewish. The answer is yes, and it takes the form of a Twitter bot. Working with developer Neil Chandra, we created an automated Twitter account that exposes these imposters in real time. Meet Imposter Buster, social media's new sheriff. He is programmed, and I note, by the way, that there's a picture that accompanies this, an avatar for Imposter Buster. It is a robot with a policeman's cap on and a sheriff's badge. And guess what? The sheriff's badge is 6-pointed star. How ironic in all this. I wonder if the person who put together that stock image knew what they were doing. So they worked with Neil Chandra to develop Imposter Buster, right? It is programmed with an updated database of impersonator accounts, and every time one of them tweets, he automatically replies and exposes them with pre-programmed evidence. For instance, herein embedded is the tweet from Imposter Buster, which is illustrated with the side-by-side photos of the same avatar being used by the fake account Yehuda Finkelstein and the real source of the photo sourced to Wikipedia, identifying him as Shlomo Goldman. And Imposter Buster tweets to this imposter at Rabbi Yehuda 1, the alleged, or the Twitter handle, the Twitter address of this alleged Yehuda Finkelstein. He tweets right to him, FYI, this account is a racist impersonating a Jew to defame Jews. And here is the evidence. Your avatar is stolen. That's not you. The fake Jew trolls rely on most Twitter users being unaware that they're being conned. Thanks to Imposter Buster, that is no longer the case, although what it really needs to do is tweet to anyone who would have seen Yehuda Finkelstein's tweets. I don't know if you can do it quite that way. Anyway, but thanks to Imposter Buster, that's no longer the case, and its antics are already driving the trolls nuts. One of them changed his username multiple times in an effort to evade the bot's replies. When that failed, he made his tweets private, effectively taking himself out of Twitter circulation. As is usually the case, alt-right bigots can dish it, but they can't take it. So, have you encountered a racist troll impersonating a Jew, African-American, Latino, Muslim, or other minority on Twitter? Yair says, send it his way at yrosenberg@tabletmag.com, and they'll put the bot on the case. And do be sure to follow Imposter Buster and his exploits on Twitter. And of course, you will find him at Imposter Buster. No spaces, of course, because Twitter. Very interesting. I thought that was a nice application of the technology to attack at least one angle of the problem. And it doesn't have Donald Trump directly in the story. He's not mentioned at all. So that's good. Now, speaking of Donald Trump, we really do have to discuss some things about Donald Trump. Here, I think, an interesting angle on Trump and his unique relationship with social media and the presidency. Right? I just think this is worth noting, although it seems like beneath the surface, it seems that the issue's a small one, but really there are larger swirling issues. And let's take a look at them, shall we? Trump talks to the public through Twitter. This is the headline. You know that's the case. Here's what happens when your next president blocks you. Yeah, you know that, of course, Donald Trump does speak to the public through the media at Real Donald Trump, right? David Pearson, by the way, has written this piece. It's in the LA Times, and we'll read through it. But he's been tweeting as Real Donald Trump as a private citizen and then as a semi-private citizen running for president. And now as president-elect, he's still doing the same. So lots of issues swirl around this. Like, for one thing, I guess first you'd want to ask, does the president-elect fall under the Presidential Records Act? You know, of course, that Barack Obama, when Barack Obama tweets, particularly when he uses the @POTUS Twitter address to do it, even though it's probably not necessarily him doing the button pushing. Yes, all that, we understand that. But that's a communication from the president, and although it's not the same thing as a communication from the president, say, to the Senate of the United States, notifying them that he is nominating Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, it's a presidential communication nonetheless, and there's all sorts of archiving and preservation issues wound up in it. But what about what sort of issues are there or ought there to be around a Twitter account made famous by Donald Trump as a private citizen, and that being his favorite method of communication? When he becomes president, what happens to the account? I mean, I understand that Barack Obama plans to turn over the keys to the password to the POTUS account to Donald Trump upon his assumption of the presidency. Yes, but what happens to real Donald Trump and that account? I mean, does he continue to use it? If he does, can it be said, for instance, that the tweets sent there are the tweets of a private person in private person mode, whereas the tweets sent from POTUS are a public person in public person mode? Is there a difference? The presidency tends not to recognize the difference very often at all because of the nature of the job. But what about the rules for blocking? Like Donald Trump blocks plenty of people from real Donald Trump and those communications. The POTUS Twitter account has never blocked anyone, and I suspect, well, one, there's probably very little reason to, although I'm sure there's lots of trolls, but nobody reads and replies, I don't think, really, to the POTUS account. But he's probably the president, to the extent that he's actually involved in handling that account at all. Whoever has probably been instructed, lots of legal issues are raised if you actually start blocking somebody. So my suggestion would be just don't read replies if they annoy you, but don't block anybody. Will Donald Trump continue that tradition, if it can even be said to be a tradition, or what? And what does it mean if the president gets to decide unilaterally, if he's got personal control of his Twitter account, which Donald Trump sometimes does, unilaterally decide that there are certain people, and in some cases, surely some of them will be American citizens, who he can prevent from receiving, at least directly, public presidential communications. Now, again, mostly those communications we assume would be, I didn't like Saturday Night Live this week, so who cares? And if there are things like, hey, there are nuclear missiles coming, everybody hide, the fact that you're blocking, I'm blocked from getting that. I think I would probably get that news through other channels. Including, by the way, a very interesting story that we didn't mention yet that seems to indicate that as President, Donald Trump will have access to a little-known emergency channel through which the president can send universal and unblockable text messages, which I assume are meant ultimately for things like, hey, everybody, nuclear missiles on the way. Hide if you can. Or I don't know what else they might use them for. But I guess presumably they could say, this holiday season, buy and enjoy Trump wines and just send them. I don't know how much constraint there is on his ability to use these things. I don't really worry a great deal about getting unsolicited texts from President Trump. But I don't know. Unless it's a mind control one. Dun, dun, dun. Does that exist? I don't know. Maybe they're developing it in Comet Pizza. You can never tell anymore. Anyway, there's actually a lot of weird issues swirling around this Twitter thing. So let's look at David Pearson's take on this thing and stop listening to my take, which I've never bothered to write down. Whereas David has done this very nicely and neatly. So we should just use his material. Heather Spohr. Spohr? S-P-O... I'm going to add an extra like half syllable to that. S-P-O-H-R. Not S-P-O-R-E. I'm sure that comes up quite a lot. I didn't mean to tease you, Heather. Heather Spohr didn't vote for Donald Trump. That's why I don't want to tease you. But that doesn't mean she's not interested in keeping up with what her soon-to-be president has been saying. I'm not enough to follow him on Twitter. I just wait for other people to express outrage. And that works pretty good, and maybe it's a way around all these rules, right? That hasn't been so easy to keep track of what the soon-to-be president has been saying. It hasn't been so easy for the Thousand Oaks mother of two. It's good she's not from Two Oaks, because she'd be really busy with her kids. Thousand Oaks mother of two, ever since she tweeted during a Republican primary debate last year that she found the celebrity businessman repulsive because of his feud with Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly. Spohr is now one of an untold number of people who are blocked from following the president-elect on Twitter. How he ever noticed that, I'll never know, but whatever. So that is, the blocking is a distinction that ordinarily wouldn't matter, except that Trump, who hasn't held a news conference since July, they got that dig in there, uses the social media platform, Twitter, as his primary tool for communicating with the American public. Now we have a reason to worry. Sorta. Spohr can't follow her future president, can't view his tweets or communicate with him on Twitter, not that she ever thought he'd notice. She now relies on friends to send screenshots of the president-elect's tweets. Her husband also checks for her in the morning using his Twitter account, given Trump's propensity for posting missives overnight. It makes me laugh in a way that's not funny, said Spohr, 37, a blogger and freelance writer. I can't see the tweets of the president-elect. He's going to be my president. It's absurd. Of course, I wouldn't doubt that Heather spends some part of her day tweeting, not my president, but okay. For these purposes, he's going to be your president. And it is absurd. In a campaign year defined by the upending of political norms, this may feel like just another Trumpian triumph over tradition. Twitter, after all, is a private platform where free speech protections don't apply, and users can choose to unfollow, mute, or block anyone they want. I highly recommend the mute tool, by the way. But unlike other Twitter users, Trump is about to become the 45th president of the United States. His conduct on social media matters, according to presidential historians and political scientists, because by blocking followers, Trump is effectively saying only Americans who resist the urge to publicly disparage him are worthy of his pronouncements, if that's the basis on which he's blocking people. What if he starts blocking people based on their voter registration? Well, he hasn't yet. But what if he does? That's the job here on the radio show. The president should speak to all Americans directly and not filter people out, said Timothy Naftali, a presidential historian at New York University. Are people blocked from watching television or listening to the radio when a president gives an address? The president-elect needs to get used to the idea that presidential words matter. That's true. And everyone needs access to those words. It's unclear how many people are blocked by Trump, who has 16.3 million followers to his account. Twitter says it won't comment on individual accounts, and the Trump transition team did not respond to a request for comment. I don't even know if there's an easy way to tell how many people you have blocked. I guess you can look at, there's a blocking list, but it doesn't count. I don't know if it counts it for you. It's also unclear if President Obama, the nation's first chief executive to take to Twitter, has blocked any followers on either his private account, Barack Obama, or the official presidential account, POTUS. So I wonder I think probably the rules apply to both the same. And even if they don't, it's probably good to behave as though they do, because you don't really want to get into a situation where you are forced to defend outrageous statements made by your personal account by saying, well, but that was me just, hanging out. I didn't mean to call everybody racial slurs on my POTUS account. I just hit the wrong button, or I was just on my regular account, or whatever. You really just can't afford to find yourself in that situation. And if you're a normal human being and you respect the office and you don't want to get yourself in trouble, you just treat both accounts the same way. The White House did not respond to a request for comment on this, although I did see, I thought, at least some claims being made on Twitter that the POTUS account never blocked anything. But again, there's no way from anybody else to verify that without access to the account. Wait till one of those things gets hacked, by the way. That'll be fun. Anyway, last year, however, White House spokesman Patrick Rodenbush tweeted, quote, "Nobody is or ever has been blocked from the POTUS Twitter account," unquote. There's the answer to my question. In response to a conservative critic who said he had been blocked. Well, that's the answer to my question of who was it that said that anyway. Trump will take control of the official presidential account after he takes office. It's uncertain which one he'll use as his primary account, or whether people followed or blocked on his personal account will get the same treatment from the presidential handle. A search on Twitter reveals numerous people who claim to have been blocked by Trump's account, often posting the screen grab to prove it. Here's one such tweet. "Regret to inform that I cannot see Trump's tweets you're referring to, as I am blocked by the President of the United States." Well, not yet. Anyway, it says David Roth, a sports writer, who said in a tweet that was retweeted itself more than 7,500 times. Some seem to revel in the ban by someone poised to become the most important world leader. "Well, I finally made it," tweeted Adam Malloy, a self-described actor. I think it's fair to say you're allowed to self-describe that way. Singer, writer, and producer as well, with fewer than 200 followers. "Real Donald Trump blocked me on Twitter. I'm not one to brag, but this feels good." Others say a block by Trump is akin to a badge of honor. That's kind of what he just said. "Being blocked by Trump is the new verified account," tweeted someone with the handle J.R. McGrail. Andrew Friedman, a New York media strategist, discovered he was blocked by Trump in 2013, shortly after his then boss, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, filed a suit against Trump University. "If anyone happens to bump into the next leader of the free world, can you ask him to unblock me on Twitter? Many thanks," Friedman recently tweeted. The move puzzles Friedman, who said a president should try to persuade all Americans to buy into his vision for the country. It seems like it would be in his best interest to allow people of all opinions to read, see, and hear all that he has to say, Friedman said in a phone interview. Well, he can't help it if he's born effed up, right? Those are the things he doesn't want people to see. Anyway, what warrants a block from our next president? Sometimes all it takes is a puerile jab from a high schooler. Antonio Del Otero, 16, said he was blocked after replying to one of Trump's tweets by likening the president-elect to a Cheeto snack. Why? I don't quite understand that one. "I didn't believe it at first," said Del Otero, a Detroit resident who has since deleted the offending tweet because he caught the ire of Trump supporters online. Oh, he shouldn't have done it. Oh, well. "I didn't know what to think. I see this guy all over the news, and he must have seen my tweet and blocked me. I was really shocked, but my grandma was thrilled." Good news for you, Grandma. Though a fervent Trump detractor who uses an expletive on his Twitter page to denounce the incoming president, Del Otero is still hopeful he'll be unblocked after Inauguration Day, figuring staff members will eventually take over the presidential account with a clean slate. If not, it's just as much an honor to be blocked by the 45th President of the United States, said Del Otero, a member of his high school class council. Okay. Thanks for telling us that. Experts, however, are less sanguine about Trump restraining his Twitter behavior. Trump has turned the microblogging service into his soapbox, allowing him to circumvent the media with which he is often at odds. Like the fireside radio chats of President Franklin Roosevelt's Trump, same difference, uses the technology of his day to bypass the press and communicate directly with the nation. With his speech unchallenged, Trump has used the platform not just to rally his supporters, but also, critics say, to distract from negative coverage and to attack his rivals. His tweets have insulted a cross-section of America, including celebrities like Alec Baldwin, Penn Jillette, and Neil Young, the media, CNN and New York Times, companies like Amazon and Macy's, and places like New Jersey, like whole states, President of the United States except New Jersey, I guess. And those who have insulted him back, some of them find themselves blocked. Every president, of course, has a different tack for dealing with critics, some better than others. said Barbara Perry, Director of Presidential Studies and co-chair of the Presidential Oral History Program at the University of Virginia. President Kennedy once canceled all White House subscriptions to the New York Herald Tribune. And now they're gone, so there you go. President Richard Nixon created an enemies list that included journalists. And President Lyndon Johnson endured the incessant anti-war chant outside of the White House of, hey, hey, they don't put that in there, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Thin skin is typically not a desirable quality for the country's highest office. What will happen to a president who deliberately removes himself from criticism? Perry said. There are workarounds that let users see Trump's tweets even if he blocks them, such as opening a new account. There's also an emerging movement on Twitter to beat the president-elect at his own game by tuning him out with the hashtag #BlockTrump. That, however, seems unlikely to change social media behavior ingrained with more than 34,000 Trump tweets in 7 years. Naftali, the NYU historian, is already wondering if Twitter may be the best medium for recording the president's legacy. I've been thinking about his presidential library. He said, would there be a whole wall of his tweets? An interesting question. Well, we got some time before needing to deal with that one. But golly, there's there's an awful lot. Okay, let's see. To harken back to the Taiwan issue a little bit, I think, and maybe to help inform the expats living in Taiwan, although, I mean, they have access to our websites. They're in English. They can read what's going on in our heads. But a little bit of the American progressive view of all this, which, again, admittedly, is largely, I think, still about Trump bashing, and rightly so. He deserves to be bashed. He's an idiot. This from our good friend of the Netroots and Netroots denizen himself, Boo Man of the Boo Man Tribune, entitled, Take This Trump Stuff Seriously. It's the other S word, of course, but we're on the radio, not blogging. And, of course, you should take it seriously because it has the word S word in the title and is written by Boo Man. Okay. We don't help ourselves sometimes, but you and I understand who this is and what this is about. Just some good musings on this, I thought. I don't think it's productive to be glib about long-established rules of doing things when it comes to China and Taiwan. Whatever you want to call the deep state, the development of the One China policy was a diplomatic dance that worked precisely because all sides agreed to abide by something that didn't make perfect sense. This is what we were saying earlier, I think. Good reason to share it. I think it has been vastly more successful than the way we treated communist takeovers in Korea and Vietnam, for instance, where we went to war. All right. And yes, it's a way of controlling our own lunatics just as much as it is a way of controlling theirs. If Trump is being advised by lunatics now, that's a problem. And if he's just so ignorant and pig-headed that he doesn't know or care what he just did by having his staff arrange a call with Taiwan, that's not a bold way of violating pointless norms. It's an extraordinarily dangerous thing and portends all kinds of problems for our country, the world, and the prospects for peace between nations. I would add, even if not necessarily as between the U.S., Taiwan, and China. Because he goes on to say, I cannot understand how Trump was allowed to offer a state visit to Rodrigo Duterte, president of the Philippines. It's beyond belief. This absolutely cannot happen. Figuring out how to handle Duterte and our long-standing relationship with the Philippines is a real conundrum, and a ton of work would have to be done before we could even think of rewarding Duterte with a state visit. Honestly, I don't think it would ever be justifiable. And Trump cannot go plodding into Pakistan-India relations without getting a briefing from the State Department. They are nuclear-armed powers on constant alert against sneak attacks from each other, and it's unimaginably irresponsible to speak with either government without carefully considering the implications of every word you're going to say. You can talk all you want about how Trump has some kind of mandate to challenge the status quo and that our elites are just using stale norms to control the executive. We've had normal presidents deal with that straitjacket on Cuba, Israel, China, anti-Soviet policy. That's not what we're dealing with here at all. If you want to challenge norms and blow up long-standing ways of doing things, it's all the more important that you understand exactly why we have done things the way we have and what the implications are of changing them. Right now we're relying on something quite appalling. And a quote here from where, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. The quote says, it's the important thing, if he were president of the United States now, this could lead to breaking off of diplomatic relations between China and the U.S. Those in Taiwan, of course, differ, as we heard at the beginning of the show. I think important to keep in mind. The quote continues, having this mishap occur before he is president is better than having it occur after he's president, said Bonnie Glaser of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Privately, I expect Beijing to find a way to give him an education on Taiwan. Yeah, the Taiwanese contingent going crazy about that, I'm sure. Right now, the article or the blog post concludes, we're relying on foreign powers forgiving our president-elect because he's an idiot who doesn't know what he's doing. We're going to tell them not to take him seriously or personally, and that will give them an opportunity to educate him. But if we can't educate him and his staff can't educate him, what hope is there for our adversaries and allies trying to educate him? It's an interesting summation of some very important points that I think need to be considered in counterpoint to the Taiwanese perspective or the expat Taiwanese community and their perspective, which is a good one and well worth having in our pocket to help temper our reactions to some of what Trump is up to. Okay. Still much more to get to. And let's see. Trying to make a quick sort along the way and figure this out. Let's see. I think at this point, by the way, we would have to also take note of the ongoing amazement in the journalistic community, of the Comet Pizza situation, and that is the exchange, which I don't have at hand, but I saw mentioned last night. And the discussion was between Jake Tapper and Michael Flynn Jr., which was a pretty amazing thing in a number of ways. Certainly laudable for its sentiments, I thought, but that's because I'm biased in that fight. But then also some other good observations made about how, well, gee whiz, shouldn't more of this have been public? Apparently, at some point in private, and I believe it was private texts and maybe direct messages via Twitter, perhaps it was, as between Jake Tapper and Michael Flynn Jr., who, if you're not familiar, and I'm not particularly familiar with his anything. I mean, I'm not familiar with Mike Flynn himself, much less Mike Flynn Jr. But apparently Michael Flynn Jr. is intimately wrapped up in his dad's affairs and is something of an aide-de-camp to retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and handles all sorts of administrative stuff for him, and is also apparently a true believer in the same nonsense. So I saw this tweeted out yesterday by the account Will McAvoy, ACN. I remember the old fictional character, but somebody tweets with that avatar and under that name, saying, if you see Jake Tapper out and about, please buy him a drink for me, basically. And here's the reason. He is retweeting, this is where everything gets complicated. He's retweeting a tweet from Jack Posobiec, who is Special Projects Director of Citizens for Trump, believe it or not. And is that real? Is it a joke? I can't even tell if I can't tell who's who in this conversation. But here's the deal. What I'm looking at is the exchange of texts between Tapper and Flynn, retweeted by McAvoy, but first captured and reposted in Jack Posobiec's, whoever that is, tweet here. And let me get to the original, to that tweet itself and enlarge it so we can read this thing. Because again, it's screenshots of a text fight. So this helps straighten things out a bit. It is, Jack here is clearly actually is it's not a parody of an idiot who works for Citizens for Trump. It's an actual idiot who works for Citizens for Trump, whatever that is. And he's complaining, CNN host Jake Tapper comes unhinged at Michael Flynn Jr. over Pizzagate. And so the screen caps of the exchange come from Tapper's phone, I think. Although maybe it could certainly be Posobiec's, however he says his name, phone looking at Jake Tapper's messages. But I guess if they're direct messages, you would think it would have to come from Jake. So I don't know. I'm not sure how this comes to get shared. But Tapper apparently directly messages Michael Flynn Jr. and says to him, Michael, about this pizza thing. The police called Pizzagate a fictitious conspiracy theory tonight. Does someone have to die before you take this S, and he actually does use the S word here, seriously? Spreading this nonsense is dangerous. And there's a response here, which I guess is from Flynn, that says, I want it to be false. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean, but then the next response says, Podesta emails that no one wanted to take seriously. I don't know whether there's an interruption in the communications here, but then I guess these screen caps are chiefly for Tapper's statements. He then goes on to say, it's not the site of a satanic pedophilia cult. It's a effing pizzeria. Show me what you're talking about that proves a satanic pedophilia cult. Did you know that it was satanic on top of everything else? Your tweet is wildly irresponsible. Listen to me. You are going to get someone killed. Maybe an innocent child. For what? Multiple question marks on the for what. The next page that gets captured is Tapper saying, I guess, again, give me one thing that proves that the DC police are protecting a satanic pedophilia ring. And, he goes on, I guess there's more conversation, and I guess at this point Tapper says, here's a bunch of examples of dumb fake news and stupid conspiracy theories circulated by Alex Jones, who's the progenitor of this stupid Pizzagate idea. So apparently he shows a bunch of them and says there's a ton of them. For instance, then he asks him, do you think Sandy Hook was real? Because remember that Alex Jones is behind the Sandy Hook truthers as well. Now, Mike Flynn Jr. here says, I'll take a look at all this other stuff. And of course Sandy Hook was real. And Tapper follows up with basically, look, Alex Jones is a liar, Michael. You brought him up, not me. So apparently some tough exchanges there as between the two of them. And let me tell you, as I guess I put it out there this morning on Twitter, these Flynn clowns, the both of them, have got to get their damn heads on straight and fast, because one of them is set to become national security advisor sooner rather than later. And the other one appears to be doing a lot of the backup work for Dad. So for these two nuts to be anywhere in government, I mean, you remember what they did to Van Jones when people thought, I don't even know what the real story of it was, whether Van Jones stands by the idea that there's something, whatever it might be, that we weren't learning properly about 9/11, but basically the allegation from the same crowd that supports Flynn was that Jones had to go from the White House because he once retweeted or reposted something that implied that he was a 9/11 truther. But now the National Security Advisor of all things. I mean, Van Jones wasn't National Security Advisor. I don't really even want to contemplate the dangers of handing the national security state keys over to somebody who's not only such a lunatic, but such a lunatic that they would engage in something as ridiculous and outlandish as this. I mean, all the conspiracy theories seem ridiculous and outlandish if you look at them individually. But I don't know. I mean, on a scale, I guess I would say, 9/11 was such an outrageous disaster and was so destructive and so overawing in its spectacle that I guess in hindsight, I can't be surprised that among the hundreds of millions of people who witnessed it as shocked Americans, not to mention the shocked billions around the world, there are going to be a significant number of people who think that some other thing, anywhere from, some minor details that are not being discussed, not necessarily with nefarious purpose, all the way up to total conspiracies about how the U.S. government did it and blew up the buildings with bombs because jet fuel can't melt steel whole. All the stuff that goes along with that conspiracy theory. I guess it can't surprise me that such a horrific, world-changing event has its doubters of various stripes. But the idea that the National Security Advisor would count himself among those that believe a conspiracy even like that is disconcerting. Much less the fact that the guy counts himself among those who believes in a conspiracy theory that is of considerably less value and impact. Although, I'm sure, I guess if it were true, oh my God, they're running a satanic pedophilia cult out of this pizza joint. That would be bad news. Very bad news. Not 9/11 news, but bad news. But of course, they're not. And the level of imagination that it takes to get to, I did in fact see 2 gigantic skyscrapers blown up and destroyed by flying hijacked airplanes into it. That's something that, the mind can lead you to some strange places about that. On the other hand, you're looking at a pizza place with some ping pong tables. The mind that takes you from pizza, ping pong, owner knows somebody who's a political activist that I don't like. Political activist works for a political campaign that I don't like. Satanic pedophilia cult inside. That's not the same kind of, misfired synapse situation. There's something much, much crazier going on with that. And it's in the brain of the person who presumably now will hold the keys to an apparatus that can disappear your ass forever without questions being asked or any court ever being able to claim jurisdiction over the question of what happened to your body. Is that bad? I don't know. Is that bothering anybody? It bothers me, and you're going to have to get your head in the game, Junior and Mr. General as well, assuming we can't derail your assent to the job, which you really ought to be able to do, but no mechanism exists for it. All right. Well, okay. So I see in the background, in addition to many other things, what do we got? There's a small cadre of Federalist Society folks who are angry at the prospect, or angry at me for being dumb because I suggested the January 3rd thing, which is okay by me. I probably won't respond to much of that. The idea that they would be furious and upset about it and dismissing it as impossible is okay. That's cool by me. It's actually kind of part of the program, and it would be more disconcerting if they ignored it entirely. So I'm cool with that, just to let you know, if you've been monitoring that. And although there have been some interesting discussions, we could probably do a whole show. We won't. I won't bore you with the details. You can follow it on Twitter if you like, of people sort of trying to poke holes in the theory. And there are holes. There are places where you can trip it up, just as there is with almost anything. And it depends on everybody having their briefings done right and their heads screwed on and get properly caffeinated to execute the procedure. And it's way, way out of the box. And it's absolutely the case. It's totally justifiable for the opponents from the Republican side to say this is just not the way things are done. You don't understand how the Senate works. And of course, well, those of us listening to the show know, well, he kind of does understand how the Senate works. And by the way, I would not go so far. Many people are being very generous to me in describing this thing, and saying that I'm a Senate rules expert. To be as clear as possible about it, I have educated myself both by making myself available as an aide on the House side, so that I could witness parliamentary procedure in both houses close up and first hand. Also, of course, graduated from law school, so I got some understanding of, the basics of how these things get interpreted, and the basics of how the people who design such things think, and also just being steeped in the reading and study and discussion and understanding of these rules. It's something that I wouldn't say I'm not a Senate parliamentarian, and I don't know the entirety of the rules everywhere either, but I do know a lot about the functioning of a very narrow slice of the rules, specifically the filibuster reform procedure that got tagged as the nuclear/constitutional option. And I've probably done as much thinking about that as any expert in the field on that subject. And I've studied a little bit about those as a result of the study that I did of the constitutional option writings and thinkings. I got a pretty decent understanding of the operations of the first day of a new Congress. It doesn't surprise me that there will be opponents of it, and even supporters of the idea of installing Garland, who would say this is just not how things work. In fact, I had a rather lengthy discussion yesterday with somebody who I gather would count themselves as a progressive and certainly a supporter of the wish that Merrick Garland would be installed on the Supreme Court, not so much because they love Merrick Garland, but because they want to see Obama win instead of Trump, even if they weren't a huge Obama supporter. But, you get hung up on details that, if you're steeped in the terms of art, and speaking with somebody who's not, you can get hung up on these things. We literally, for like 20 minutes, went around and around in circles where this woman was saying, you don't understand, they're not going to be able to do this because there isn't a quorum present. And how do I know that? It's if you just go and read the rules, 51 senators are required for a quorum. Now, of course, we're talking about a situation in which there are 66 senators, and in most definitions, 66 is greater than 51. But I unstated, and she never really did get around to saying this, is, of course, the prospect that Republican senators could walk out in an attempt to deny a quorum to do business. But we're talking about a situation in which there are 66 seated and sworn senators, 34 of which would constitute a majority quorum under Senate rules, and there are 34 Democrats and 2 independents, and presumably at least 1 Republican there to protect their rights on the floor. That would constitute a quorum in a Senate of 66. But she kept pointing back and saying, no, look, read the Senate rules right on the Senate website, and if you don't believe me, here's a CRS report that says a Senate quorum is constituted by a majority, and then it said, in parentheses, 51 senators, assuming no vacancies. And she pointed to that and said, see, that definitively says it's 51. It's constitutional. It's a matter of, the Constitution itself says 51. And I said, that's not what that says. You're leaving out the point of assuming no vacancies. They're just saying, generally speaking, in a Senate of 100, 51 constitutes a quorum. If you look, of course, at the Constitution, you won't find the number 51 in there at all. It says a majority of the body. And when they wrote it, there weren't 100 senators. So there's no sense in saying that the founders meant for it to be 51. And there's no sense in reading the sentence 51 assuming no vacancies and then not acknowledging that there are 34 vacancies at the time we're talking about. And though the conversation did eventually turn over to the question of, well, are those seats vacant or are they senators regardless beginning noon on January 3rd, because the Constitution does say in the 20th Amendment that the terms of the senators end on January 3rd at noon. How does it actually put it? It's the 20th Amendment. Here we go. The terms of senators and representatives end at noon on the 3rd day of January, blah, 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 and the terms of their successors shall then begin. So doesn't that mean that at noon they're in? In other words, there's never a 66-member Senate? Arguable, yes. But it's also equally arguable that, sure, the terms of their successors begin, and it's now up to them to be sworn in and assume office for that term. Whenever they swear themselves in, if somebody's sick and, laid up in bed with let's say pneumonia for fun, because that was such a fun issue during the campaign, and then they've got pneumonia, they're in the hospital, they can't speak. I mean, there's not even, you can't send a doctor or a Senate officer to the hospital to swear them in there. And that has happened in the past. Joe Biden got sworn in at the hospital, not because he was sick, but because, of course, his family was in that terrible car accident. But you got to take that oath. Somebody actually argued yesterday, well, it doesn't require an oath for them to begin their terms as senators. All they have to do is be alive on January 3rd. And I think that's a misrepresentation of what's happening here. The term begins, but that doesn't mean you're a senator yet. That is to say, somebody is eligible to sit in this seat from January 3rd of, in this case, 2017 through January 3rd at noon 6 years later. But if you don't show up and take the oath, and you don't show up until the next day, doesn't even have to be a long delay, does your term begin on January 4th? No, your term to which you were elected began on January 3rd. You assumed office on January 4th, but your term began on January 3rd. Term is not the same thing as the person who occupies it. There are terms beginning, and all of the seats whose terms began at noon on January 3rd, 2017 are vacant until you take the oath. It was objected to me yesterday. There's no oath prescribed for senators in the Constitution. There is, however. I mean, it's not written out, spelled out for you in the same way that the presidential oath is. And it's very confusing because the presidential oath, the role of the president is described in Article 2 of the Constitution, as you all know. And the oath both the requirement of the oath and the wording of the oath are spelled out in Article 2, because that makes sense. On the other hand, in Article 1, where they describe the roles of Congress and how it will be constituted, it doesn't say anything about oaths or about what the oath should say. So that was the objection. The Constitution doesn't require an oath, so you can't say that they're not senators just because they haven't taken an oath. The troubling part is that the oath for members of the Senate is, in fact, prescribed in Article 6 of the Constitution for some dumb reason. I guess they forgot about that and stuck it in at the end. I don't know why they did it, but Article 6, Clause 1, 2, 3. Senators and representatives before mentioned, and members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test, remember that, shall ever be required as qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. It doesn't spell out the wording of the oath. That's done by statute, whereas the oath of the presidency is done by Constitution for some reason. I guess they thought it would be a great idea to do that. They end up taking the same oaths anyway, because why reinvent the wheel? But yes, there is a constitutional requirement of an oath. Your term starts, you've brought your certificate of election, you've laid it before the Senate, but you're not a senator under the Constitution unless you've taken your Article 6 oath. The end. That's all there is to it. Could somebody find the other way? Sure they could. They're finding the other way on Twitter all over the place. Does that matter? No, unless they're federal judges or Senate parliamentarians or have a majority in the Senate of whatever number when it push comes to shove. We'll see how people will vote. Now, whether or not they have the guts to try something like this is not evidence as to its efficacy. In other words, you should separate the question of the mechanics. Can it work? And I would submit to you, if you have a majority and they don't give a good goddamn what anybody thinks about it, of course it can work. You can do virtually anything. Should it work? Different question. We have the guts to do it? Totally different question. But there you have it. Lots of interesting details swirling around all of this. And the best sign of the feasibility of it is the disturbance it causes among the opposition, quite frankly, at this point. But afterwards, if you've been watching the discussion, I haven't. I've just had flashes of it because I'm busy reading these other stories. And you're waiting for my reply. It might not come. I'm not even sure whether I'll bother to reply. I think it's probably best if they can get riled and then be sure they're going to win. But I think I need to poke them a little bit. We'll see. The show's about to end, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Okay. One last tidbit that doesn't make any particular sense that needs to be shared that will tie back to an issue mentioned at the top of the show, and one which is extraordinarily relevant but is new to me, but I think ought to be mentioned, and maybe we need to follow up on it. Yes, there are still recounts going on in a couple of the states, and I'm losing track of where they stand individually. But this piece from The Guardian needs to be noted for the record, for those of you following along. And it's about Michigan, and maybe Rosalind McGregor wants to talk about that at some point. U.S. elections, broken machines could throw Michigan recount into chaos. And by the way, guess where the broken machines ended up? Yeah, right, exactly. So, subheader here, over half of Detroit and nearly one-third of Wayne County could be affected, and the recount won't happen if discrepancies can't be solved by counting by hand. What's going on here? I'm not even sure, but I can tell you where it didn't happen. Grosse Pointe. And I only know Grosse Pointe because it's in the movies. That's the sort of place it wouldn't happen. If it's happening in Detroit, it's not happening in Grosse Pointe. Broken polling machines may have put vote counts in question in more than half of Detroit's precincts. And you know how Detroit voted, by the way? Just would be important, right? And more than one half of Detroit's precincts and nearly one-third of surrounding Wayne County, possibly throwing the Michigan recount into chaos. If the discrepancies can't be solved by recounting every paper ballot in question by hand, a recount in those precincts simply won't happen. Donald Trump's slim margin over Hillary Clinton means any chance of the state flipping on a recount likely hinges on Wayne County, where the Democrat won by a landslide. Clinton lost by 10,704 votes total in Michigan. Wayne's population of 1,759,335 makes it the likeliest candidate to contain errors bigger than that margin. 87 of Wayne County's decade-old voting machines broke on Election Day. Mysterious. This according to Detroit's elections director Daniel Baxter. He told the Detroit News, which first reported the story, that ballot scanners often jammed when polling place workers were trying to operate them. Every time a jammed ballot was removed and reinserted, he suspects the machine may have recounted it. Preliminary investigation by election officials in Wayne County found that 610 of the area's 1,680 precincts could not reconcile the number of votes cast according to the machines with the number of ballots issued according to the electoral rolls. Detroit contains 662 of Wayne's precincts. Of 392 of those, the number of votes didn't match up. The question, though, is, as I'm reading that, I'm wondering, well, if it's an overwhelmingly pro-Clinton voting area and votes were double counted, well, maybe that would expand the margin for Donald Trump statewide rather than contract it. Either way, you ask for a recount, you're going to have to take the results. I'd like to know. I mean, you know what? Might even be more comforting somehow if you find out it wasn't even that close. But very interesting. And gee whiz, if all the broken crap machines don't end up, one, in the poorest districts, and two, where Democrats vote heaviest. Why does this keep happening to me? The other piece that I wanted to share with you, the more irrelevant of the two, is supposed to motivate you to donate to support the show. And here it is. Mashable has this piece, totally unusable as far as news goes. Forbes' 2016 list of the highest paid YouTubers will make you weep. It's making me weep. Let's see if it makes you try to dry my eyes with money. Huh? We'll put it that way. What's the story here? This is one of those pieces. It's written by a woman by the name of Saba Hamidi. This is one of those pieces that make you say, why do any of us get up in the morning? You don't have to give me money. You can just commiserate with me. Here's the deal. Apparently the number one highest paid YouTuber, and I can't believe that that's an occupation. My kids actually now aspire. My youngest says, I'm going to grow up to be a YouTuber. And I'd say, that's ridiculous. And then I read this. PewDiePie. I'm thinking that's the name, how he would pronounce it, his online name. It's Pew, P-E-W, D, but it actually should be pronounced Die-Pie. That's how it's pronounced. Pew, P-E-W, Die-Pie. But he's Swedish, and I suspect that he doesn't know that Americans would read that as PewDiePie. I mean, he might mean for it to be PewDiePie, but I think he means cutie pie like PewDiePie. PewDiePie, who recently declared he will delete his YouTube channel once he reaches 50 million subscribers, is the highest paid digital star of 2016. The Swedish gamer, whose real name is Felix Kjellberg is my best stab at that for American audiences, made an estimate $15 million for the 12 months ending in June 2016, according to Forbes' recent ranking. And I guess that would be for clicks on ads. Well, not all of it, because he's got all kinds of crazy side deals going. That's the point. This guy makes videos of, I think, of other people playing video games. Kjellberg's success is innately digital. He launched his channel by making Let's Play videos, which showcase a gamer playing through a video game alongside footage of that player's narration and reactions to the game. So you see what he sees on screen, and you see video of him talking about playing the game. That's a $15 million a year business. People, I guess, clicking on ads and subscribing and just ad revenue. And my problem is, A, I don't have 50 million subscribers. That's a problem. And two, my subscribers are too smart to click on the ads in the YouTube video versions of our podcasts. Like, why would you? I don't know. I think kids do. But I mean, that's what I'm saying here. You get $15 million a year making videos of other people playing video games that get watched by people who like to play video games, but instead of playing the video games, they just watch other people play video games and then click on ads. And that's $15 million. What? So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. When I say, okay, I don't need $15 million, but when I say, all right, well, what I'm getting here is in the neighborhood of $300 in a month, which is, I mean, it's good, it's great, but as income, yeah, okay. We would need more to say pay the mortgage if you were a single person and didn't have someone else to rely on to bring in more money. That's not an income. $15 million, now that's a big income. Now I could give a lot of that away or spend a lot of that on the show or give a lot of that back to you. Wouldn't need it. $1 million, too much, don't need it. $100,000, too much, don't need it. Couple $100,000 would be great, build a studio and all that, but I'd have to pass that one around. That couldn't be for me. $15 million for showing other people playing video games. That's the point. You get the audience. People don't have to give you individually a great deal of money in order for a large pile of money to pile up all of a sudden and for you to have a media empire somehow rivaling even, I don't know, Rush Limbaugh in his reach, except that he doesn't care to use it for anything except showing people playing video games. I suppose if it was political, he'd have a much smaller audience. But it just goes to show you how much money is out there, how many people are out there, how much you can collect in small increments. It is possible to be a successful online business entrepreneur, etc. It doesn't require that much from anybody. Just a couple of clicks, in fact. Doesn't even have to be about donating money. Click on the stupid ads and then go back. I don't know. Make your friends click on the stupid ads. How about that? We'll leave it up to them to do it and say, I don't know. It's just one of those things that makes you sad that you work instead of doing this stuff. And that's just the number one on the list. They're all the same. They're all about the same age. They all produce things equally useless and stupid to you and me, but that's because this is the kids. They need to get off our lawn. But millions and millions of dollars. I don't understand it. But if we could bring in $15 million here, I'd hire you all, and then your job would be listening to the show. Wouldn't that be fantastic? That'd be an easy way to dispense with the additional income, and then we're all happy. And then we could make videos of ourselves listening to the show and make another $15 million. Are you in? Let's all jump in. All right, time for me to get off here and hand things over to the guys in the after show right here on Netroots Radio for them to pick up on all the stories that I wasn't able to cram into all this, and there are some good ones. Ready? A Russian name to lead things off. Nadia Tolokonikova. How do you even say that? Well, look, she's from Pussy Riot. You know them, right? Well, she's got a warning for America. Don't become complacent with Trump's rise to power like Russia did with Putin. And boy, if anybody knows, it would be those... What are we going to say? I was going to say those guys, but they're not guys at all. Those women, they know from which they speak, right? Okay, Donald Trump endorses Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte's mass murder campaign. We know about that one. Democrats without backbone hide from each other or fall down while rushing to slam colleagues' anti-Donald Trump plan. There's more, of course, on the last half, and I'll tell you about that after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Inside baseball from our favorite insider on the last half, Chris Reeves, Tom Sovero, 433, with an update on the race for DNC chair and the importance of the outsider's voice inside the Democratic Party, plus more on Nancy Pelosi, the greatest vote counter in the history of the legislature, retaining her leadership role. All next.